Tonight's topic is on providing the same chance budget 2024 and the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Autism's report. This event marks the start of AsIAM's campaign for the full implementation of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Autism's report, which was published back in June of this year. The implementation of this report is key to the success of the autism community in Ireland, and those that are on the call tonight, families, parents, siblings, whoever the case may be, will know that the implementation of this report is key to the success and to the progress of the autism community in Ireland, and it requires cross-departmental support from all aspects of government and agencies. The report itself makes 109 recommendations, with each recommendation touching upon the life cycle of the autistic community and families in Ireland. And just before we begin tonight's session, the event will be recorded and it will be circulated to those who registered for the event, and it will also be made available on our YouTube channel in the coming days. I'm also joined by my colleague Adrian, who's there to support for any technical difficulties that may arise this evening, and we've had a few already, so thank you for bearing with us. This evening, I'm delighted to say that we're joined by four incredible speakers. So we have Adam Harris, CEO of AsIAm, and Adam will speak about why we are here this evening and the importance of moving forward with the recommendations and the full implementation of the report. We're also joined by Senator Micheal Carrigy, who is the chairperson of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Autism. Senator Carrigy will set the scene on the work of the Oireachtas Committee, the recommendations of its final report, and the hopes for implementation in the lifetime of this Dáil. Many of you on the call tonight might have appeared before the Oireachtas Committee and know of the work that has been undertaken over the last 12 months. Very important work, which all kind of facets of the community have participated in over the last 12 months. We're also joined by Dr. Àine Roddy, who is a health economist and lecturer in health informatics at ATU, Sligo. Dr. Roddy will highlight the real economic and financial barriers experienced by the autistic community and their families. And the Oireachtas report highlights a number of measures to offset this impact that many across Ireland experience. And it's all very timely, given the fact that we're just a few weeks shy of the budget 2024. We're also joined by an international speaker, Dr. Alistair Gaetano, chairperson of the Autism Advisory Council in Malta. Alistair played a central role in securing Malta's strategy and associated legislation, and tonight can provide a practical insight into the importance of having the recommendations in the Oireachtas report put into practice, and the importance of them being anchored in legal soundings. So each speaker will speak for between 10 to 20 minutes, and at the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity for people to put questions to the panel. There's a little box underneath your Zoom session that says Q&A, and I would encourage people as the session goes on to put questions to the committee, and myself and Adrian will work through those questions and we'll get through as many as we can as possible. And if there is some questions that aren't picked up due to time constraints, we will get around to answering those. You can email AsIAm and we will do our best to respond to each of the questions. So without further ado, I might start off tonight's session by giving the floor over to AsIAm CEO Adam Harris.
Thank you very much, Micheal. And can I just begin by thanking everyone for giving up their time to be with us this evening. We know September is a very busy month for families. We know this time of the evening is very busy in many homes across the country. So we really appreciate people seeing the importance and joining us for this discussion this evening. We know, I think we've had the better part of 300 people register for tonight's webinar, and we know many people who are not just with us this evening will be watching it over the coming days. And it's just at the outset important to thank a really fantastic panel of speakers that we have, people who have been key to bringing us to this point in the discussion, both in the context of the autism strategy and also in the very solid research that grounds the need for that strategy. I want to say a particular thank you to Alistair De Gaetano, Dr. Alistair De Gaetano, who joins us all the way from Malta this evening, and who we just found out a few moments ago is actually joining us on Maltese Independence Day, so he should be off enjoying himself and putting his feet up on a bank holiday in Malta. So we're very grateful to you for giving up your evening this evening. I suppose just to set the scene, and that's really what I want to do tonight, both how we got here and what we must need to do now in terms of where we go next. I suppose the reality is, when it comes to autism, we've had no shortage of false starts. We have had task force reports into autism. We've had any number of pieces of disability legislation and disability strategies that have promised to deliver for our community. And since 2012, we have had repeated efforts to both legislate for an autism strategy or simply to provide for an autism strategy. And I think that's obviously incredibly frustrating. And we know when we talk about this issue within our community, there can at times be a sense of, haven't we been here before? What makes this time different? And I suppose from the point of view of our organization, as we prepare to celebrate our 10th birthday, what we're very mindful is we're an organization who, at least for the last 5 to 7 years, have been campaigning for an autism strategy. And we really hope that through our work and through the work of really strong local autism support groups right across Ireland, we can help to make this time different, in partnership with the really fantastic leadership we're seeing from the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Autism. But I think there is a sense that this time has to be different. So how did we get here tonight? Well, I suppose since 2012, we've seen a number of very concrete efforts to introduce legislation around an autism strategy in Ireland. That would have started from a bill from Deputy Michael McCarthy of the Labour Party in 2012. That would have been followed by numerous all-party motions, by a bill in the Seanad from Senator James Roddy, from that bill being reintroduced in this Parliament or this Oireachtas by Sean Canny and the technical group. We've seen promises from Anne Rabbitte in terms of implementing an autism innovation strategy, and we know that work has already begun in terms of putting in place a steering group, in terms of launching a national consultation, and we know we're expecting to see that autism innovation strategy in the coming number of months. So there's been a huge amount of effort that has taken place. Perhaps something that's been really tangible, or perhaps the most tangible action we've seen to date, has been all parties coming together around the table in the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Autism. That committee met for a number of months, starting last summer 12 months ago. And last June, it created a report. That report had 109 recommendations, which really, I suppose, can serve as a roadmap or an agreed vision in terms of where we need to go in Ireland when it comes to autism policy. It really is a cradle-to-grave strategy around how we can remove barriers for autistic people so that autistic people can have the same chance in Irish society. And if I might say, I think it's fair to say that when we talk about the strategy, there's 109 recommendations that can probably be broadly categorized under 4 headings. One is the need for improved public understanding and acceptance of autism. 2 is improved services for autistic people. 3 is improved training for people who work with autistic people. And 4, and in my opinion, the most critical piece, is legislating for this change, requiring the government to have a strategy that realizes these aims for autistic people, that creates that strategy in partnership with autistic people and our families, and that regularly updates and reports on progress in that strategy every number of years to the Oireachtas. So there's been a lot that has happened, and over the last number of months, and indeed years, but particularly over the last number of months, we've had the privilege of engaging extensively with Senator Micheal Carrigy and with the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Autism, both in trying to inform its work based on the experiences of our community, in terms of collating those experiences through running surveys and making submissions to that committee, and really excitingly even looking at how we can make sure that autistic people have access to our democracy in terms of making sure that the committee process is accessible for autistic people. And I suppose we know now that that report has been issued. That is an agreed vision of where we need to go. It's a vision that all parties have signed up to. And we know it's more important and it's never been more urgent to implement that report. And, you know, just to set the scene in terms of where our community is at, we only need to look at the Same Chance report. Every year we do a poll of our community. This year, over 900 people responded. And it really paints a stark picture of autistic life in Ireland. There's a reality that there's never been a higher level of awareness of autism in Ireland, and yet those invisible barriers are as pervasive as ever. In terms of our community, 90% of people do not think the Irish public understand enough about autism. 91% believe that being autistic is a barrier to being accepted by and making friends with others. 39% do not feel safe and protected in their community. 38% believe they've experienced discrimination in the last 12 months on the grounds of being autistic. 61% do not believe the education system is inclusive of autistic people based on their experiences. And I think this is the most stark statistic of all. 86% of people do not believe they have the same chance in Irish society. So there's a real urgent need to act, and it's very clear to us that the time to act is now. And over the coming number of weeks and months, there's two very clear opportunities for government to take action. The first is the forthcoming budget. AsIAm has made a submission, a pre-budget submission, which really calls for the Joint Oireachtas Committee report on autism to be fully implemented, to address those cost of living barriers that autistic people are facing, and critically also to improve services for autistic people. So the government can begin implementation of the Joint Oireachtas report on budget day. But critically also, we're conscious that we're probably only 12 to 18 months away from a general election. And what we don't want to happen is that we go back to square one, that the next time there is a general election and the aftermath of it, we're starting again the conversation about the need for a law for an autism strategy or the need for an autism strategy itself. So what we believe is really, really critical over the coming weeks and months is that we have an opportunity to ensure that the government acts on the recommendations of that report. And tonight is really a call to action to our community. It's an opportunity to really highlight the urgency that exists, but also the opportunity, the window of opportunity that exists. And we're asking you tonight, you, your family, people in your community, and local support groups to take action, to write to your public representatives. What was very, very clear and very, very powerful throughout the duration of the Oireachtas Committee on Autism was the power of local support groups making this an issue in their locality, putting this on the radar of their public representatives. And we need to continue that good work. So what we're encouraging people to do after tonight is to write to their local public representatives. Not only that, to ask others in your community to do the same, so that we can ensure that when the Joint Oireachtas Committee report on autism is tabled in the Dáil, that the Dáil is saying across all parties very clearly that the government needs to follow those recommendations. It needs to fund them, but perhaps most critically of all, it needs also to legislate for them. What I would also just say is that in terms of our organisation, we won't be found in terms of wanting in holding parliamentarians to account in terms of implementing the report. One of the things we're going to be doing is implementing a scorecard. So the recommendations in the report touch on many departments, many agencies, and we're going to be reporting annually on how those agencies and departments perform against the recommendations. We've already written to every agency and department seeking to meet to discuss the recommendations, and we will be continuing a very, very significant campaign now and into the future around legislation for the strategy. So tonight is a starting point. I want to thank you for coming. I want to thank our speakers for coming. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the presentations. I'll pass you back to Micheal.
Thanks, Adam. And I guess when we hear the figures of the same chance report that was published early on in the year, it really does give a sense that it's incumbent on the government to ensure that the recommendations are implemented. But going back to Adam's call to action, that can't be done via us alone. We need the support of the community, and that call to action that Adam referenced is really important, that you guys get behind us as an organisation and behind the report itself to ensure that your TDs and representatives are aware of the report, but also on the call to action as well. So thanks for that, Adam. I'm going to hand us over to Senator Micheal Carrigy. Micheal will speak about the work of the Oireachtas Committee report, the recommendations, and I suppose his hopes for implementation of the report during the lifetime of this government. So Micheal, I will hand over to yourself.
Thanks very much, Michael. I might get you just to add me as a host again. My thing has dropped the same as earlier on. If you could, please.
That should work again now, Micheal.
Perfect. Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thanks very much for the invitation to take part in the seminar here this evening, and thanks to Adam for outlining something that has, I suppose, been lacking in legislation in this country for a long number of years. But I suppose to give a bit of a background to the committee, and I suppose first of all, I'm father of a young 8-year-old autistic son myself, and I suppose it's something I felt when I got elected to the Oireachtas. The lack of supports, the lack of a strategy that was there in government, and it was with that in mind that I started working on looking to have legislative changes made, and which led to the setting up of the Joint Oireachtas Committee, which is a cross-party group of members from both the Dáil and the Seanad. And over the period of roughly 15 months, we had 23 public session meetings and 32 private session meetings over that period, and met in the region of up on 90 organisations, from parents groups to third level colleges to government ministers, to tweak out where the issues were, and to start putting together this report of recommendations, which you said was launched in June of the year gone by. But I suppose prior to the committee being set up, I would have looked at the legislation that was in place in Malta as a starting point, to be honest, and that is the starting point and the end point, and that's where I want to go. Have been chair of that committee. It's something I fully believe in, that we need to legislate for the strategy and put that whole of life supports there for all those on the autism spectrum. And that's why it has been key, that recommendation within the report, that we legislate along those lines, to the legislation that they have there in Malta. And that piece of legislation, it will require that an autism strategy would be published on a regular basis every 3 years, that we'd have a committee to monitor that with people from the autistic community, and that would require the various Minister for Disability of the day to come to both Dáil and Seanad and report on the implementation of the report. And that work has actually continued since the committee dissolved in June and the report was published. And there was a number of recommendations within the report, with the setting up of an all-party committee to monitor the implementation of the report. And I have sanction got from the Ceann Comhairle for that. That process has started, and it will be an all-party committee comprising of former members of the Autism Committee, but also older members of the Oireachtas that wish to take part. It will also have representatives from a number of other sitting Oireachtas committees that cover health, education, social welfare and employment. So the chairs of them Oireachtas committees would also form part of the all-party group, with the support of the secretariat that was there from the Autism Committee. So that is a very, very, very strong support that's coming from the Oireachtas and from the Ceann Comhairle to put that in place, because that does not normally happen. I will be putting that in place for early October, and we will start to meet as a group to make contact with the various government departments on the implementation of the various areas within the report that are pertinent to them. And as part of the agreement that we have put in place, we will also be working with the Disability Matters Committee to give us an opportunity to, if need be, bring government departments or organisations in front of the Oireachtas in public hearings, as well as us holding private hearings as a group. Within the Parliament itself, and I know we're working very closely with Adam and all the team there in AsIAm, a commitment, from the houses of the Oireachtas to moving to get accreditation as an autism friendly parliament. That work has been ongoing since last December, and our aim is to have accreditation by December of 2023. And we will be one of the first parliaments in the world to have accreditation. But in my view, and we've looked at other parliaments, we will have the accreditation with the strongest support measures in place compared to any other parliament in the world. And I think that's important, that we set out as the place of government and take a lead from the top. And that we have an understanding. There's training taking place for all Oireachtas members, secretarial, parliamentary staff, all staff throughout the building up on 1,500 in total, and that has been ongoing over the last number of months. And an audit has been done on the complex. So as I say, we're working towards that accreditation by the end of the year. And I think that's important. As I say, we would hope then that would lead into all government departments and all local authorities, that we have taken this as a priority, and that we're taking a lead as the place of government, and that we understand, we accept, and that will, as I say, be rolled right across society. We are also travelling to Scotland actually in 2 weeks' time. We were meant to go earlier during the committee hearings. As you know yourself, Scotland had a strategy between 2011 and 2021. They reviewed that strategy and they've made changes to it, and are now making new implementing, I suppose, from where the scene was, bad practice. They're looking at best practice. So we felt that there's a lot of ways that we could change what we have here and implement something that they are implementing, whether it's the one-stop shop model they have. They also have an all-party committee within the Scottish Parliament as well that's reviewing it. So we're meeting the Scottish Health Minister, Scottish Autism, and the all-party committee, and to see what recommendations we can bring back from there to here and have them implemented. So I suppose what I would say is the report, while it's large, a lot of that work has been ongoing over the last number of months. We've seen within third level education, Minister Harris has brought in a lot of supports, financial supports for the universities to put infrastructure in place, and also put out calls for courses for those on the autism spectrum or with those with intellectual disabilities, to give them that opportunity and have them supports there for third level education. And I know I would love to see a situation, and this is what we're working to. I've met with my own local college here, TUS and at Athlone, that we'd have something similar to the courses that they have in Trinity, with a number of local companies supporting and providing employment opportunities. As I said, a lot of work to be done, but key to it is the legislation to underpin that. And as Adam said earlier, you don't know when government will fall, and I don't want a situation that the government would fall, and we don't want to have an autism innovation strategy in place, but also key that we have legislation in place that will underpin that strategy, and make sure that it's reviewed on a regular basis, and that the minister, whoever they may be from whatever political party, that they be enshrined in legislation that they must come in to answer to the people in neither the Dáil or Shannon on the implementation of the report. It's a priority for me. I want to make sure that this is put in place for my son and for all your sons or daughters, or for those that are watching on the call here tonight. And it's 10 to 15 years too late. This should have been done a long number of years ago, but for various reasons it hasn't. But it's a commitment that I give. I'm sticking with it. I want to make sure this happens. As I say, I've already started some work on it behind the scenes, and I'm looking forward to working with Adam and the team there, to making sure that we get this implemented and we have the legislation put in place. So look, I'll finish with that, and as I'm happy to take any questions that may come.
Thanks, Micheal. And just a reminder to people that there is an opportunity to put your questions into the Q&A box, and we'll come to them at the end once all of the presenters have presented. And I guess, I should say that, Micheal, that it's not lost on any of us here tonight, your commitment to the autism community and your commitment to ensuring that this report is implemented and legislated for. I guess, none of us want the case where the report is just a report and that is it. But as I said, that's not lost on us here tonight. Your commitment over the last 12 months, and indeed beyond that, to the autism community as such. So thank you for that, Micheal. So our next speaker is Dr. Àine Roddy, who is a health economist and lecturer in health informatics at ATU. Dr. Roddy will highlight the real economic and financial barriers experienced by autistic people and their families across the country. And the Oireachtas report itself highlights a number of measures that can be taken to, and if fully implemented, can remove that burden that is experienced by autistic people and their families. So Àine, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Can you see the slides okay?
Can see the slides okay?
Great. So I'll start sharing them. So firstly, thanks very much for Adam and Micheal for all the passion and dedication. A lot of hard work has gone into what you're involved in, and it can often go unthanked. So thank you for what you've done, and very interesting presentations, and I look forward to Alistair's presentation next. So I'm just focusing, it's an overview. First, we're looking at kind of, I suppose, to make a very strong economic argument to invest in hopefully the forthcoming National Autism Strategy. But then in terms of making our argument, we're highlighting the financial hardship the families experience. So this is based on a national survey that I conducted in Ireland. We're looking at unmet needs. Also very important, I think, to highlight the intangible costs that are experienced by people. So often when we see these figures, it can be hard to identify the personal experience and challenges families face. So there's a few quotes as well in relation to that, and then there's concluding remarks. So overall, in terms of to make an economic argument to invest in supports and services for autistic people, we need to really focus on the cost of exclusion and the actual loss potential for autistic people in their community and their families. So, you know, time and time again, you know, I get a very strong sense from the autistic community, they're not looking for sympathy. They just want to be treated in a dignified manner and receive the appropriate supports that they need. So from an economic perspective, autism is recognised as the most expensive condition internationally. And what's happening is, say in studies that have been done in other countries, that often it's a very last measure approach when the government start to spend money for autistic people. So rather than helping at an earlier stage, you know, in terms of preschool and in education and offering different supports, it's often a case that that's not provided, and it's much later on then in a scenario where for people with higher support needs who need, say, it may be a case that they're in institutional care or very high unemployment rates. So obviously spending needs to be across the lifespan, but it's very important, you know, the more support someone receives earlier in their life, the stronger and the better chance they have for their outcomes, for their own quality of life, health, employment, all those type of things. So in terms of, to put a figure on it, in the UK studies that were done, there's 32 billion per year actually spent on autism. So from a point of view, if there's anyone from a policy perspective listening in and the government are saying, well, we don't want to spend money, actually we'll be spending much more money down the long road if you don't actually invest at the crucial stages for people when they need support. So again, there's kind of lots of questions about the timing of when to spend money for autistic people and what's the best approaches to take. I suppose one of the real big limitations is that there's very little research done in terms of what are cost-effective approaches. I actually found out today a paper I'm involved in is published online for that, but that's, you know, there isn't an awful lot in relation to actual solid evidence about the best approach to say when to spend in that. So that's an area that needs to be addressed more, but it's something that needs to be tied in very closely with the autistic community, that it is reflecting their values and what their needs and preferences are. So in terms of financial hardship, I did this research as part of my PhD study, and it was based on 195 families who had 222 autistic children. So there was one family that had 5 autistic children. So I think this is kind of the headline figure, and people, it is quite shocking that the annual cost per child for families was over 28,000 per year. So in the next slide, I have a breakdown of how that works out, say, kind of in out-of-pocket expenditure. So that was over about 9,000. And then in terms of, a lot of parents had to report at least one parent may have to have given up work or reduced hours. That has a huge knock-on effect in terms of the family income. And then in terms of informal care, you know, they had difficulties, some families accessing carers' allowance was means tested, and it was placed in, and still does, a huge financial strain on families. So it was a case, families where children had higher supports needs, that obviously was associated with higher costs. 15% of the families were lone parent families, and 33% of the families actually got into debt as a result of trying to meet their children's needs. Now, by no means were the families saying, okay, we've spent this money and we feel we've been able to address all their needs. There was still a lot of unmet needs, but the families were reporting that they were actually going into debt to try, and it might be, for example, paying for speech language therapy, to try and get diagnosis, different supports that they felt would help their child. So I'm sure for all parents or autistic adults listening, or in whatever association you have with someone with autism listening tonight, I'm sure you can list in your own head of all the different extra additional expenses that you have. So, you know, for example, extra electricity. A child may have difficulty sleeping at night and is up watching television, and you know that there's all this adds up in terms of it's an extra cost that occurs for the family. It could be special diets, special clothing. In terms of care and assistance, that was quite low, which was kind of shocking because the families reported a huge need for respite care, but they couldn't actually afford to pay for the respite care that they needed. So by no means did these costs actually reflect that all the needs were met. I suppose they were trying to prioritise what they felt was the most urgent thing for them to address. So you'll see about for medical costs, that ranged from 0 for some families up to over 17,000. Again, some families would report a lot of travel costs. They may have to drive their child to a special school that they felt was more accommodating. Again, long drive involved. And paying for that, and then there was just kind of autism assistance dogs. Some families had them. There was veterinary bills involved. So these are all day-to-day extra expenses these families reported. So in terms then, the families were asked then in terms of their unmet needs, because when I was doing the research, I met with different parents in focus groups before I conducted the survey, and time again, parents reported their extreme frustration at not being able to access services. And I suppose at times maybe not sure kind of what service they needed for their child. There's lots of different challenges they faced. So they were asked a number of questions in relation to unmet needs. Kind of one of the key things is that over 74% of parents in the survey reported that their child had at least one unmet need in relation to, say, medical care, services, therapies. There's more detailed information in the papers, like some would have reported a number of unmet needs. There could be 6 or 7 different services they felt that their child needed and wasn't receiving. And they were asked, you know, did they feel their child still needed it? Over 92% reported they did. And then just kind of, I suppose, to see from an objective kind of view, you know, had a health professional actually recommended some of these therapies? And over 81% had. And then that over 66% of them were in the public system. So I'm sure everyone listening can understand the frustration involved in trying to access these services and the very high prevalence of the difficulty in accessing in terms of unmet needs. I suppose to look deeper in terms of what were the barriers for families. So over 39% were saying they couldn't afford to pay, which is completely understandable. Not everyone can afford, and so, you know, you can easily be paying €60 for speech language therapy or more, or say physiotherapy, 60, or occupational therapist. And they may be more basic services. You may have to go for more advanced that are more expensive. In terms of the question, the necessary medical care, therapy, intervention treatment wasn't available to you. Over 61% reported that. So that ties in again then with a huge amount of, say, there might be the staff involved to provide the service, there's lack of funding, different issues there. I suppose different figures kind of stand out a bit more to me in terms of there were no private services available in their area for over 31% of families. So that's kind of an issue of concern for me, that if there is an increase in support payments, which is completely deserved, in some locations, you know, if it's a more rural area, the challenges they'll face, even if they get, say, payments in terms of access and services. So there needs to be a number of different approaches taken in terms of addressing the unmet needs. Obviously, you know, much more provision of staff available. But if it's a case that they still feel they have to go privately and they're not in an area or remit near them. And then in terms of child on a waiting list, over 55% of the children were on a waiting list. So I think it gives some more insight into the complexities involved in trying to access, say, the support that they feel is appropriate for their child. Also that 18% were unsure of their child's needs, which again, you know, like a one-stop shop approach where they could find out more, perhaps, you know, get more advice on their particular challenge that they're facing at the time, what would be the best and the most supportive approach to take. So I suppose in terms of intangible costs, and something that came across when I met with a lot of parents and when they filled in their survey about their experiences, you know, often they felt so isolated and reported they were actually living in a bubble type situation. This extreme situation of always fighting for services, being extremely isolated, a lot of, say, repetition over being completely exhausted, both mentally and physically, both from the strain of fighting for services and then maybe, say, a lack of sleep, financial difficulties, were all factors. Again, another factor was discrimination. I know Adam mentioned it earlier in his talk, within society, where one parent reported how no one speaks to their child, such a lack of respect shown, and that we've such a long journey to make in society in terms of understanding people's additional needs. Again, emotional and mental strain involved, constant stress and worry, sleep difficulties. So I suppose the study I did was for children aged 2 to 18, but in terms of, obviously, for autistic adults, there's different intangible costs involved, and there's a certain amount of studies done. Again, it's an under-researched area, but a theme that would come up a lot in terms of autistic people would report about autistic burnout. A very complex situation, but very much tied to, say, lack of barriers in place in terms of understanding in society, or access, say, to mental health supports, or an appropriate work environment that understood the accommodations they needed. So there's all these different aspects in terms of the impact that it has for autistic people in social isolation, employment issues, and their general health and well-being and quality of life. So just kind of in conclusion then, I suppose, very much, you know, it's a while since this study was done. We're in a cost of living crisis. And when you add that with the extra financial costs incurred for families, it makes a very strong case for families to receive more supports, different social protection measures and grants to be in place to try and reduce their susceptibility to hardship and poverty. Addressing unmet needs is complex. Obviously, you know, there's a number of aspects involved in planning, much more funding, research and neurodiversity training in partnership with the autistic community. Again, going back to the Oireachtas report and say, in terms of a coordinated lifespan, that how they're addressing it from all the different government departments of health, social care, education, employment, criminal justice, housing and social welfare. But I suppose the key thing is that we have so much to benefit from autistic people. We just need to give them the same chance. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Àine, for that really insightful presentation. I see some of the commentaries coming in asking, you know, can we share the research and so on? And my colleague AsIAm will certainly circulate the information in the coming days. Just picking up on the 28,000 figure, and you kind of referenced it at the end that research was done back in 2018, and the figure was referenced in 2018. And with the cost of living crisis that we're in now, I'd imagine that's you know, having, you know, increasing from 28,000 probably over 30,000 if we look at the cost index of inflation as it is today. And just another thing also on the intangible costs, this is something that's probably lost at times, this intangible cost and the impact that that can have on families when they're constantly fighting and battling for services. And in reality, in an ideal world, that 28,000 should be zero. Like there should be no burden cost on families in order to, for them to be able to provide the appropriate services for their child. So thanks so much for the presentation. It was really, really insightful, and I know people will take a lot from it. Our next and final speaker on tonight's panel is Dr. Alistair Gaetano, who's the chairperson of the Autism Advisory Council for Malta. And I know Alistair appeared before the Oireachtas Committee, if memory serves me correctly, some time back. Alistair played a key role in securing Malta's autism strategy and the associated legislation that came about as a result of that. And I suppose he's here tonight to kind of speak about the practical insights into the very real impact that, if the recommendations were put in place and an autism strategy was legislated for, the real impact that could have on families. So Alistair, I might hand over to yourself if that's okay, and you're very welcome. And happy, was it Independence Day or Malta Independence Day? Happy Independence Day.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to the previous speakers also. Good evening to everyone. So I will try to keep this practical also, and link what has been said so far with some experiences from Malta and how we could maybe go ahead. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate also the Joint Committee on its initiative. I know also that, as was mentioned, that the budget is coming up. So this is also a good basis, and it's good that AsIAm also put forward its recommendations. I will link again to the strategy and also, let's say, promote the need for a strategy. I know that AsIAm mentioned this, Senator mentioned this. However, in Malta, having the strategy in place has helped a lot, because it lays the groundwork, and it also has a roadmap in place, something which is fixed for a specific period of time. The fact that you have legislation also does help, because as was mentioned, governments do change. One of the issues in Malta was, both in the wider disability sector and also when it comes to autism specifically, was that whenever you have, let's say, a change in government, and even within the same government, if you have a change in minister, a cabinet reshuffle, there's a change of political direction at times, and this creates uncertainty. You go back to the drawing board. So actually having a strategy in place and also having legislation underpinning that is important, because at the end of the day, then you have the civil service that actually comes into play, and there are certain obligations which are incumbent on any government going forward, no matter what changes you actually have. Yes, definitely, there can be a bit of course correction done, but still, if you have something which is there black on white, it will definitely help. And in our experience, even if our national autism strategy came into force in 2021, it definitely has given a bit more comfort with that. So one of the things I liked in the Joint Committee's report was the reference to the need for a whole of government approach, and this is something which we actually try to do in Malta also. So you have a cross-cutting strategy in place, and as you can see also even through the Joint Committee's report, there's a lot of cross-cutting issues. But on the other hand, you have a lot of sector-specific challenges which have to be dealt with. So at the end of the day, having a bird's eye view is important. And then again, having legislation, having a strategy in place, it's actually makes provision for this also. So with the Maltese experience, it's about taking stock and also planning the way forward, and then translating this into concrete actions. This is something which is useful also going forward. So as Adam mentioned that there has been pre-budget submission following up on the Joint Committee report. When you have a strategy in place, it also makes it much easier, because you have concrete actions which also emerge from the strategy. When it comes to actually advocating for budgetary allocations, then you can peg this specifically to actions in the strategy. In fact, in Malta, the way it actually works, whenever any ministry makes a proposal for budgetary allocations, we have to mention what European commitments, what the national commitments we are referring to, what actions there are from the government's electoral manifesto that we are pegging to, but also any obligations which are written in national strategies, be it national disability strategy, national autism strategy. So that definitely helps us make our case when we actually make requests for budgetary allocations. For example, this was like used when we actually made the request for monetary allocations like last year, like linked to the service personal assistance, not just like for autistic people, but disabled people in general, but definitely like I will come to this later also. Personal assistance, it is something which like has helped a lot, like with the lives of autistic people. So then again, having like such a structure in place, having, let's say, such a strategy in place will definitely help a lot. And with us, like, it has not changed things overnight. As I said, the strategy was launched in 2021, like it covers us till 2030, but it has like started like to make things like slightly easier. Also, we hope that the momentum will pick up over the next years, and also people have started to get used to the fact that there's a system in place, there's legislation in place, there's obligations in place, which are also incumbent on the government. So going forward, I would like to also like refer to something also which Dr. Roddy mentioned. It's very important that like going forward, there's always the underlying thread of nothing about us without us. So our legislation on autism, the 2016 Act, like makes reference to the UN CRPD, UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This is like a convention Ireland has also ratified, just like Malta and every other country in the European Union. And at the end of the day, it is very important that the voices of autistic people are there front and center. Yes, it is important to listen to allies, it's important to listen to family members, to professionals, and all of these were also like consulted when Malta was drafting its own national autism strategy. But then again, it is important that directly or indirectly, the voices of autistic people are there, because at the end of the day, we actually have to make sure that we have a strategy that's fit for purpose, because it addresses the needs on the ground, it sees what is actually necessary, and it actually tackles those things. So the Joint Committee's report is a very good basis for that in Ireland. And also with any strategy going forward, hopefully we will see an Irish autism strategy very soon, as Adam mentioned. It also has to respond to the national peculiarities like that Ireland is also tackling, apart from general overarching themes, and also like regional peculiarities. Like in Malta, also our strategy, for example, mentions the fact that we have two different island regions with very different realities, and we also have to make sure that like these different realities are also addressed in an appropriate manner. So just to give you a bit of an overview, like in Malta, there's an Autism Advisory Council, which I chair, which actually was set up by the Act. So the Act was passed in 2016. The council was set up in 2018. And the council have representatives from different line ministries that actually deal mainly with autism. So the Act was again 2021 to be able to respond better to the strategy. So there are ministries for health, for disability, for education, and for employment. So like, we don't have the specific ministries, but it's the ministry of the day that deals with these areas. We also have the corresponding faculties in the University of Malta. So we have checks and balances, state disability service provider, the national independent monitoring mechanism for disability, and we also have representatives from civil society on the council, and there's also the obligation that you have to have autistic representation. So then again, nothing about us without us. So the council was responsible for drafting the strategy, but it's also responsible for monitoring the implementation of the strategy. So the Ministry for Inclusion does send out regular requests for reporting to different stakeholders who are mentioned in the strategy. There's also an implementation plan which was drawn up, and then the council will be able to monitor and see what red flags there are. So there's also accountability, and we can keep different stakeholders on their toes. The issue of awareness is very important across the board. This is something which Adam mentioned also. So as Adam mentioned, awareness is much better, but then again, unless action is actually taken, we cannot actually have things work out the way they should work out. And something that Dr. Roddy mentioned also, one of the aims of our strategy was also to be proactive rather than being reactive. It's a very Maltese thing. Unfortunately, we also see the number of other countries, we end up fighting fires. And it's important to actually fight fires if there are fires, but if we can actually make sure that the fires do not start in the first place, it will be much, much better. And also the cost of autism, it was one of the things which we also try to factor in, Dr. Roddy has done this in her research. We've been seeing these kinds of reports for ages. When I was doing my dissertation, my PhD dissertation back at Trinity, I still remember referring to a number of reports, pay now or pay later, one of the most famous ones to come from the other side of the pond. And so these studies have been done for a long time, but unfortunately, sometimes we're still fighting fires. We have to make sure that this is something which we actually move towards. We need a paradigm shift. So I will like touch on like the main areas which the Joint Committee's report like has covered, and I will also link it to okay how Malta try to like tackle these matters through its strategy and also through concrete actions. I'll start with disability services, always like one of the biggest issues. So like in Malta, in this respect, we have undertaken like mapping in this respect. Also, we are working as management strategy also on guidelines for autism therapies, like what flies, what does not fly. For example, there's issues such as the bleach enemas, which are also like banned in a number of countries. Like we also like want to make sure that that is reflected in Malta, and also have regulations as regards like which therapies that would be acceptable and on which lines, to make sure that hard-earned money like is being like spent properly, and that like harmful therapies are not offered. Also, there's like public social partnerships, which the government of Malta enters into disability service providers when the state cannot provide this. So this is something which is covered by the strategy also on the basis of the needs analysis that was also done. And there's also a reform of Malta's disability assessment and program eligibility systems. Right now, there's a lot of like divergent assessments, and eligibility criteria can vary across the board. I know that is something also which was covered by the Joint Committee report. Ireland also had a shift like in systems like over the past years. Malta like wants to move towards this, especially when it comes to invisible disabilities. When it comes to autism specifically, like we actually need to factor these in, because unfortunately many times you have general like assessment tools such as the Bartel index or the mini-mental index, which were not made specifically for autism. And in this respect, to actually make like need to make sure that like autism is dealt with as it should be. And there's also the issue of funding, as I mentioned, having concrete actions in place. Like with the gaps identified from this mapping, we are putting forward business plans like, for budgetary allocations, while also tapping into EU funds and like EU instruments such as TSI, basically, which is like technical support instrument of the EU. When it comes to education, the Autism Advisory Council like has given input to the Education Ministry on its upcoming education strategy, but also making sure that we don't reinvent the wheel to go by what is already autism strategy. We have also tried to look beyond just like the primary and secondary like field, because unfortunately many times autism was very much a childhood thing. So there's like an autism spectrum support team in place when it comes to primary secondary education. But the council actually is meeting with different higher education institutions to see how we can actually like focus like also on the higher education, especially on transitions. There have been, on the basis of the strategy, memoranda of understanding put in place with the University of Malta, a project on transitions for autistic students, and also we are discussing with the Malta College for Arts and Technology when it comes to entrepreneurship for autistic people. We're also looking towards other countries also. For example, with Canada, I have a very good like cooperation model with higher education institutions. Canada recently also passed federal legislation with an autism strategy. So we are also like trying to take a leaf out of their book when it comes to education. Social protection is mentioned also, as I mentioned, personal assistance reform, which we are working on, even like with civil society, local civil society, our National Disability Federation, the Autism Associations, Autistic Students Community, which is autistic-led, Parents Association, which is parent-led, and also European Network on Independent Living at European level. It's important to learn from other areas also. And also in this respect, there's a system of tax credits being like launched by government. As from like the next like tax return filings, Autism Advisory Council like has worked with the Finance Ministry to make sure that like the criteria for this make sure that the right therapies are included, the wrong therapies are not included. As I mentioned, also disability assessment program eligibility reform in this respect. When it comes to employment, actually there's an Irish element to this also. We are submitting an Erasmus Plus application to build upon current systems we have in place for transitions to employment. It's a program called Way to Work. We're also, as part of consortium, working with specialists in Ireland, which I know that AsIAm has also like worked with, to be able to focus on this transition to employment and also job retention, which is a big issue for autistic people in Malta. And also when it comes to training, something that Adam mentioned, we have like worked together with different stakeholders on having, let's say, targeted trainings for businesses. For example, recently our independent monitoring mechanism had like a training given by autistic people to different banks when it comes to like neurodiversity at the workplace, and we're also engaged in the Malta Business and Disability Forum, like in this respect. When it comes to health, we are working with the Health Ministry and the Ministry for Gozo, which is like the other island region I mentioned, having a concept of pediatric one-stop shops. and also reaching out to partners abroad, like making sure that we have accessibility of premises, accessibility of services in place, and also like training on autism. We're also working with the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, because disability data, especially autism data, is lacking in Malta. We need a proper system for this. Finally, housing planning and the built environment. In transposing the European Accessibility Act, the EU directive from 2019, Malta built upon this current legislation, whereby there's justifiable provisions when it comes to the built environment. But also we wanted to make sure that we focus further also on sensorial accessibility in this respect. We also have the Autism Friendly Spaces project going on. So we wanted to certify a number of buildings as being autism friendly, so not just physically accessible, sensorily accessible, also bringing in civil society. And finally, we also work with different entities such as like national hospitals in this respect. And there is also a memorandum of understanding between the State Disability Service Provider, which is on the Autism Council, and also Malta's Housing Authority to assist in the digitization process also of autistic people, and make sure that autistic people also have access to social housing if they can't like rent on the open market. We've all felt the financial crisis, but while at the same time not losing their like disability and autism specific supports, and like having them like while living in the community. Finally, I wanted to mention the importance of a lifespan approach in all of this. It's not just like something for children, it's been an issue in Malta. So like our strategy also focuses on autism and adulthood, autism and aging, and an intersection approach also, especially when it comes to gender. We know about like neuroqueer people who have like been relegated like many times to the back burner. So even because the gender clinic in Malta, even like people who actually like have gender dysphoria, want to transition, they also, let's say, are being catered for. So basically like in a sensitive manner also when it comes to their neurodiversity, and also like forgotten like societies such as like migrants, for example. We have like worked with NGOs or funded NGOs to give disability sensitivity training to migrants. Also in Malta, and also there's a specific section on autism, also on cultural mediators. It's important to conclude by saying that with any strategy or with any like structure you have in place, it's a living instrument. So since we passed the strategy, we already amended our Autism Act. And this is something which is ongoing. When we go ahead with implementation and monitoring, it's important to see that what the situation is, to take factor in also changes which go ahead. For example, the COVID crisis like brought a lot of changes. The financial crisis brought a lot of changes. We need to be able to respond and be proactive and not reactive, as I said. And yes, it's important to involve autistic people and their networks in this whole process, because otherwise there will be no more legitimacy to what we are doing. Be able to look at and embrace support of our best practices. Cross-pollination is important. We can learn from Ireland. Ireland can learn from Malta. This is value in bilateral cooperation, multilateral cooperation also. The EU level is very important. I know that AsIAm is also a member of Autism Europe, and this also helps. Having a solid framework, a roadmap, like will actually help in checking progress, ensuring accountability. That's it from my side. Thank you to everyone, to all of the speakers, AsIAm for the invitation. We'll always count on us going forward. And we look forward also like to seeing the next steps like on your journey in Ireland. Cheers.
Thanks, Alistair, for that presentation. I guess one of the takeaways from it is that, you know, the impact of such legislation is real and tangible in Malta. But in order for it to be a success, there has to be you know, joint up thinking across the board, but also something that needs to be resourced fully and fully kind of have the full rigor of the law, because I think without that, then it's just going to you know, almost be setting up for failure without the proper resourcing, the proper joint up thinking, and the proper legislative framework for it to be a success. So thanks for that presentation. I'll invite the panel now to come back, and yeah, great stuff. They all have their cameras on, and I'll invite the participants to continue to put questions into the Q&A box. We'll try to get around to as many of them as we can. And as I said from the outset, that if we don't get around to all of the questions, feel free to email AsIAm, support@asiam.ie, and we will do our best then to respond to that email response in the coming days. So over to the panel. There have been a couple of questions coming in, and thank you all for giving your presentations tonight, each touching upon different facets, I guess, of this whole campaign. So there's a couple of questions here, and I might just take the first one, which is on employment, and it's around how can autistic employment rates improve in Ireland. So I might come to Micheal and Adam on this. Micheal, I might come to you in the sense of, what did the report look at in terms of employment? I know it was a feature within the Oireachtas Committee and in the final report as well. So I might come to you on that, and then Adam, I might come to you in terms of employment and around, you might speak about some of the supports that AsIAm is providing in that space, but also some general supports that are out there. So yeah, Micheal, over to you.
Thanks very much. Alice, like one figure that hit me in a presentation I would have seen given by yourself, that was, I think, was over, is it 85% of us autistic people are either unemployed or underemployed. And, we had a number of organizations in with us in the committee, and actually one thing that we did find out through the committee was that a lot of organizations don't actually realize what supports are out there for people with regard to employment, for companies and something like that. And I think we got a commitment from people in the department that they need to promote that and promote what's available. But I think the awareness campaign, I think it is going to help, and that's something, as I say, we've started in Leinster House, because as I said, there is a lack of, I suppose, understanding of autism in the general population, and that's something I think that needs to change. Project, and I know we looked at the whole area with Trinity College and the supports there, the courses they have there for students with intellectual disabilities and autism, but they also have over 40 companies that are linked in to the college, to provide job opportunities, and that's, I suppose, something I'd like to see replicated in all the third level colleges across the country, and working with companies throughout the country, to provide employment opportunities. But I think the whole thing, it's just a lot of lack of understanding, to be quite honest, and a lack of supports with regard to even the whole issue of interview processes and the difficulties some people would have even taking part in an interview. And these are areas that all need to change. And I firmly believe, and as I say, doing the work we're doing in Leinster House, there are changes being made there, and I think that's where we need to make them across all government departments, and then that'll filter down through, companies throughout the country. And I think that's important that we make the start there. As I said earlier on, as the seat of government where policies are implemented, laws or changes, we need to lead by example, and that's what I would say to you, that work is starting there. And as I said, the accreditation is only one part of it, but I know and Adam and Fiona, they would work with particularly Roisin there in our inclusion officer within the houses of directors, is doing a lot of work across that area as well, and working on interviews and stuff like that. So I think it's an understanding in the general population and acceptance that an autistic person is no different than any other person, quite capable and quite well able to just might need that little bit of support and help even to do the interview or with employment. But I think that will come with change, and I think that change is happening. That's my view.
Yeah, and I suppose those changes and those steps to making the employment space more inclusive, Adam, I might come over to you to speak on that from an AsIAm perspective.
Absolutely. Well, I suppose the question is, how do we change? And I think the first, I suppose, part of the response to that is change in this area needs to be inevitable. If we just look at the demographics to begin with, we're talking about 3.38% of children in school today having an autism diagnosis. Of course, we know there's many people in the adult population who are also autistic, but unfortunately, when they were younger, didn't have access to those routes of diagnosis. And I think a reality is, what workplace can afford, if you like, to exclude 1 in 27 people? So I think we need to shift the dialogue from actually it being about, how do we get people to employ us, to actually making employers think, how can I do without this unique and different way of thinking? I think what we also have to look at is the rate of allyship that's already out there, and we need to harness that better. In the same chance report this year, where I want to get these statistics right, 46% of people said they knew someone who was autistic, and of that 46%, over half, I think, said that they knew someone in their family circle was autistic. So, we have a huge number of people in the workplace already, uncles, aunts, brothers, sisters, moms, dads who are autistic and who want to work in workplaces that reflect their family and reflect their values. And I think we need to use that network better. AsIAm has a partnership with Irish Jobs, and each year we publish a report called Autism in the Workplace. And that report documents both the experience and attitudes of employers when it comes to accessing autistic talent, and also the experience of autistic candidates and employees. And I think what it shows is knowledge is power. On the one hand, we have a reality that autistic people would like to be able to disclose in the workplace, but don't feel confident to do so because there's that lack of knowledge and understanding. On the other side, what we have is employers saying, yes, we recognize autistic people can make a contribution. Yes, our experiences where we have hired autistic people have been near university popular or is near university effective. But the problem is actually knowing where to start. There's the fear of failure. There's the fear of not having the knowledge that I need, the fear of actually having to let someone go or making a mistake. So we need to do a lot better at educating employers and also building the capacity of autistic people seeking work. I think, though, perhaps most importantly is we need to have greater ambition. The reality is when you have the scale of unemployment within a community of people that we have within the autism community, where you have 80 to 85% of autistic people being unemployed or underemployed, the reality is there's no one solution to that crisis. And we need to realize that good work for autistic people looks very different for different people. Yes, of course, there's autistic people who need the opportunity to work full-time, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. But there's also autistic people who full employment looks like 2-3 hours a week doing a very specific task. The reality is at the moment, we're not ambitious enough in terms of actually believing that autistic people can work and should have the range of opportunities that meet people's needs and interests. And I think that's really, really important in terms of expanding what our understanding of what we mean when it comes to work. I think that's very, very important.
Great. Yep.
The final point is just in terms of future proofing. I think one of the challenges we face at the moment when it comes to autism and employment isn't just about helping people into work now. It's also about realizing that the world of work is going to change massively over the next decade as AI takes root. And we need to really think about what that means for autistic people, where autistic people can add value in a world that's going to change an awful lot in terms of the labour market.
Great. Thanks, Adam and Micheal. And Alistair, if I can come to you on that point as well, has there been any significant improvements in the employment rate in Malta as a result of the legislative changes that have come in your home country?
It's a slow process, but actually we see that things are picking up. As I mentioned earlier, one of the main things is, and also linking what Adam said, it's about the employers actually realizing the value added, so to say, in this respect. Many times there's this fear, there's this mantle of fear when it comes to employing disabled people, but employing autistic people specifically. Okay, what if they have a meltdown in the workplace? What if they actually can't deliver? What if this? What if that? So one of the reasons we actually had this whole neurodiversity at work initiative, through our partners, the Commission for Persons with Disability, who are the independent mechanism sitting on council, was to actually be able to have autistic people who are already part of their team, giving disability equality trainings, giving autism-specific trainings at the workplace, as I said, for example, with different banks, to actually entice them. But also actually showing them, okay, look, we have a live one here, so to say. But at the end of the day, look, I'm just a person just like you, might have my challenges. There's different autistic people, these might be our challenges, but these are our strengths. And even, let's say, reaching out. So, I mean, it's always the first step. So at the end of the day, once you actually break through that, then slowly but surely, you actually start seeing a bit of a better response. I mean, that's why also I said we're actually with the Business and Disability Forum, so actually be able to have certain employers open up. There were certain groups that actually did open up better. For example, certain hotel chains me, which actually saw, okay, it's not what they actually thought, because many times with autism, people still think of using old functioning labels, let's say low functional autism, okay, like this person is going to create a mess, there's like presumed incompetence. So at the end of the day, many times it's just about demystifying things. I mean, one thing which always like comes to mind, which always like to mention when it comes to these kinds of events is, so remember, like from back when I was in Ireland, like it was like a conference about higher education institutions, and there was friends of specialists there and saying, okay, how do I actually sell the fact that like it's better to employ an autistic person? So if actually have a person has to do an 8-hour work day, okay, they're going to go out for smoke breaks, they're going to like have like this, I'm going to have that, we'll actually pull out like put through 8 hours like in the work day with an autistic person. If say have an 8-hour work day, they're actually going to do 8 solid hours, or if it's 6 hours or 4 hours, it's 4 solid hours or 6 solid hours. So one of the things we actually put forward. Once you actually get through to the like employer and you start demystifying these things, then like little by little we've seen like an uptake. I mean, definitely there's much more to be done in general when it comes to employment. Disabled people in Malta that needs a culture change, but actually reaching out to the other side has had definitely like a lot of benefits. So happened with us can like happen anywhere.
Thanks, Alistair. The next question is in relation to social protection, and I suppose I might come over to yourself, Áine, on this. And the question is that is posed. It says, would Áine have a view on the proposals to provide higher rates of disability allowance, depending on the level of disability? This has been in the news over the last couple of days, and I know the minister made some announcements yesterday on this. But this particular participant would like to know if you have any views on this.
Very good question. Thank you for it. I suppose my understanding from what I've heard of it is that it's still at a consultation stage, so there is going to be more engagement in relation to it. I suppose my initial reaction when I did hear about it, I did have some concerns. So, for example, I'm just making up an example. Say for so you have an autistic teenager who faces a lot of challenges, say with anxiety, and they may be going privately to a specialist to receive more supports on how to deal with their anxiety and, particular challenges maybe at school, and that they, if they went for an assessment, may be categorized in a lower need, say, category in, I'm not sure exactly how they'll come up with these kind of bands of severity or categories for the payment. But if that support was taken away overnight, that could be a very different scenario for that autistic teenager with the challenges. So that's just my concern of, there's a lot of subjectivity as well in who would do the assessments of these different categories of severity. You could go to 2 different experts and they may have different opinions on the level of your needs. And that involves a lot of frustration and advocacy in itself. So I think that it is something that requires a lot more careful consideration and consultation. I think it's great, that there's openness about increasing payments, but just, I think it would need to be very much in a case-by-case scenario for people. That would just be my concern with it.
Yeah, and I suppose that's echoed in some of the comments that are coming in. So people are quite concerned with some of the commentary. But as you say, it's in a consultation phase at the moment, and I know that's it's open until the 15th of December, I believe, that consultation phase. So I would encourage people to engage with that process and to be open and as frank as possible in their engagement with it. I guess the next question is probably one of the fundamental questions, and I know as an organization we hear this quite often, and I'm sure Micheal does in his constituency work as well, and that's around the to quote the individual, it posed the question, the chronic shortage of professionals within the HSE, within primary care, disability services in general, and the chronic shortage of those has a massive impact on families. And I guess the question is looking at, did the report look at that, and what were the outcomes or suggestions from the report itself on the chronic shortage of staff within the HSE?
Well, I suppose the figures now, and I just don't have the exact percentages to hand, but I think there's roughly over 30% of positions within the CDNTs across the country, across the therapies, unfilled at present. And I suppose the reality is there are not enough qualified people in those professions available to work with the HSE. These positions are fully funded, but unfortunately the qualified as I said, people in the various professions, be it physiotherapy, speech and language, occupational therapy. Well, we met with Minister Harris probably 12 months ago now, 9 to 12 months ago, in relation to this. And I know there was a scope and exercise going out to the various third level institutions with regard to making places available, putting forward for additional courses and making extra available places. And that was looking like that was going to be September 24. But a number of us, including myself, Senator Emer Curry, Senator Deputy Emer Higgins, and Senator Mary Siri Carney, would have met with Minister Harris again. And we felt that we needed to get some of these roles put in place for September 23. So I know they consulted with a number of even the colleges within Northern Ireland, and there was an announcement there, possibly I think it was 2.5 months ago, of over 100 places across various therapies, and the introduction of a speech and language assistance with in conjunction with 5 of the ETBs in place, to start the process of trying to, as I said, build up the number of qualified people. But unfortunately, we're 4 to 5 years from the start of those coming through the system. We had a recommendation of, maybe looking to entice people back to Ireland, covering flights, accommodation, and things like that. And that's what we need to do. I also believe, and I put it forward within my own parliamentary party, and it was a recommendation even for parents with regard to accessing private therapies that are not being provided by the state, that we need to set up a fund similar to the National Treatment Fund, which is in place, so that families that do assess an assessment and need with a properly qualified core registered practitioner, or get speech and language or OT where they're not able to get it while they're on the waiting list, if they can assess it privately. And it goes back to the high costs that Àine has put forward there, that are on families having to pay for this because we can't provide it out of state. I believe that we need to put a fund in place that parents would be able to receive some of that funding back from the state until such a time comes that we have sufficient number of qualified people filling all those roles in the CD&Ts across the country. There was proposals, and it's in the programme for government, and there was a trial done on the school inclusion model in CHO7 area, which would be sort of Kildare, North Dublin. And I know they haven't published the review of that, but my understanding that it was extremely successful, where we could get particularly speech and language into kids in the school on a daily basis, and that's what we would love to see. But unfortunately, we don't have enough qualified people there that'll be able to go in and provide that across the country. And I think that's where the positions with regard to the speech and language assistant qualification and course in DTBs, I'd love to see a situation where we would at least have 1 or 2, depending on numbers in schools, in every single school across the country. And that's where we need to get to. It's going to be a difficult number of years, I'll be quite honest. There's no point in sugarcoating it and saying this is all going to change in 12 months. We are behind with regard to having enough people in those therapies in our colleges coming out qualified. We're always going to have a certain number that are going to travel abroad, a certain number want to work in private practice, but we need to, as I say, put the proper incentives there in place as well, that they'll work within the HSE. And we've met with the HSE, I met with my own CHO area as well, with regard to do funding for students through college, that they would work with the HSE for a certain number of years after being qualified, to make sure that we're not losing those professional people abroad, as I say, as well, to keep them here and working in the state. But as I say, look, it's going to be difficult. The roles, as I say, the funding is there in place for. We just do not have enough qualified people here in the state at the minute to be able to fill those roles.
And that hits on one of the question/statement that has come into the chat box there is that, you know, we're a very wealthy country. We have a huge amount of resources, but yet we can't seem to get right one of the most basic fundamentals, and that is access to healthcare and access to appropriate services. But I suppose, Micheal, you've alluded to, you know, some of those reasons and some of the potential solutions or remedies to those. But yeah, it is one of those kind of areas that you can understand why people are quite, you know, disheartened when they hear that. Adam, I might come over to you if you have anything to add to that.
You know, I think one of the things that's really, really critical is that we make sure that families don't have to continue to wait. We know that Minister Rabbit made a very clear commitment that if assessment issues in particular facing families weren't rectified by the budget, that a fund would be put in place to support families. One of the really telling things, I think, in the Same Chance report this year was a reality that actually for the first time we saw a majority of people accessing their assessment privately. And then over nearly 70% of people on a waiting list to access services. So that clearly is unsustainable. And what we have to ask the question is, if the state isn't in a position to provide that support now, how they meet the needs of families in the interim. And I think Budget 2024 is an important opportunity in that regard. I think what's also pretty important is for us to look at how we can ensure that every autistic person has access to timely support. And we know that that will look different for different people. There is a reality, particularly when we talk about autistic adults, that there simply isn't even a pathway to assessment, let alone to support. And that's also a critical area for, I think, further scrutiny.
Thanks, Adam. And there's a couple of other questions around services and supports, and I'll come back to those in a second, a few minutes. But there was a question around, you know, current legislation and whether current legislation that is currently on the statute books, can that be used to advance any of these recommendations in the event that this legislation, or sorry, this call to legislate for an autism strategy doesn't, you know, it doesn't come to pass. So I might hand that over to either Micheal, if you might take that, and Alistair, I might come to you on that topic as well to see if there's any kind of relevance to that question from a Maltese perspective. But Micheal, is there any current legislation that can be used to advance some of those recommendations within the report, like the Equal Status Act, for example?
Well, that's what I mentioned earlier on with the all-party group, and that we will be bringing in the chairs of the various Oireachtas committees across employment, social protection, education, and that the chairs of they will take the sections of the report that are pertinent to their area, and then that they would push on whatever legislative changes can be adapted within their remit to change to make sure that we implement the recommendation in the report. So that's where the process is going to be with the all-party committee, and then, as I said, the various chairs of those various areas, to make sure that they will look at where the legislative changes can be made, and then they can follow up with their line department within their Oireachtas committee in a public setting. So that's the mechanism there to follow specific pieces of legislation that need to be changed. So that, as I said, that process will start in early October. But I suppose key to it is the overriding piece of legislation, which is legislating for the strategy, which we will hopefully have in January 24. Now, was a sort of understanding of a time frame that I have, and I would like to see a situation where we would have maybe the legislation in place prior to that. So that would be my priority.
Thanks for that, Micheal. Alistair, I might come to you on that question.
So the legislative situation, more that is a bit different. We did pass certain amendments in 2021 and adopt new legislation. So basically, like in Malta, the UN Convention had been transposed into Maltese law. So when it comes to disability discrimination, basically, claims can actually be raised in respect of any article of the convention. So let's say, I mean, there was a discrimination when it actually comes to provision of services, but we're talking about discrimination specifically. So this is important. So you can't sue for not being given a service, but you can actually sue if by not being given the service, you're you're actually put in a worse situation than a non-disabled person. So let's say, for example, if you actually need support at the workplace to be able to function properly, and you are not given that support, then that's discrimination. The other thing is that you can actually rely in making discrimination claim on different articles of the convention, all different articles. Before it was very restricted. I'm aware that in Ireland, okay, there's a bit of legislation which mentions specific rights, so we can only go that far. And when it actually comes to lodging discrimination claims, then these can actually be taken up with the equality body there. I am aware that there's some legislative amendments which were being discussed, so that could actually change the state of play. One thing which is an issue is that, okay, so in Malta, the pressure can be put on the government because we actually also ratified the optional protocol to the UNCRPD, to the UN Convention. So let's say that with the specific rights that is mentioned in the convention, it is not being implemented, then a complaint can be made to the UNCRPD committee. Ireland has not ratified the optional protocol. So even though the opinion given by the UNCRPD committee after a complaint is made is not legally binding on the country, so the country is not obliged to actually follow up on that, it is still a name and shame procedure. So let's say any Maltese resident can actually go to the UNCRPD committee in that respect. When it comes to specific rights, not discrimination, specific rights, so Malta is introducing a specific right to personal assistance. So right now, Sweden has it on the books. With Malta, we are actually working on legislation to have this there. In that case, yes, I mean, if an autistic person is denied personal assistance in terms of Article 19 of the Convention, then basically the government can be sued specifically for not giving that. So it all depends on how legislation is couched. So in any case, discrimination, let's say, legislation is always there. Discrimination claims can always be couched. It just depends on how they are couched. So I mean, that would be the most effective route, in Ireland. But then again, stronger national legislation and also ratification of the optional protocol would definitely, let's say, give many more tools to autistic people and their families in this respect.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alistair. I'll just go back to service I'm conscious of time, but we might have one or two more questions. But just going back to the issue around services for families and autistic people. One of the questions is around the recent report, the Ombudsman's report on families, and has the issues around access to residential or respite care being considered, and the views of the panel on that recent report. Now, I'm conscious people might not have read it in full detail, but even if there was a brief comment or two that they wanted to make on it. Adam, I might come to you on that one.
Yeah, this is unfortunately an issue that we're seeing constantly in the information line, and we're seeing it, I suppose, right across the country in terms of people who contact us. And I suppose what is of concern is we know that, this is very much about where respite care is not in place. Of course, that fails the individual, but it also fails the entire family and their ability to then in turn meet the needs of the individual as well. So it's very clear here that a lack of resourcing has had a long-term impact. I think in particular, when it comes to residential care and respite care as well, I think this is where the autism strategy can play a particularly important role, not only in terms of planning demographically in terms of need, because we know one of the problems we have in Ireland is that there isn't very good national planning around autism. As we know, there's no census question. As we know, only 2 years ago, the Department of Education told us it was 1 in 65 people, and now we know it's 1 in 27 people. And that in turn impacts in terms of residential and respite care in terms of planning for same. But I think the issues go deeper than that as well. I think it goes in terms of with issues of quality, issues of autistic people being placed in settings that aren't designed with autistic people in mind, or that being all that is on offer to individuals. And I think all of that, I suppose, contributes to a strain that we are seeing. So I think one of the challenges that we need to make sure is that autistic people are supported from cradle to grave. That's what the autism strategy is fundamentally about. But I think critically what we need to look at is those supports within the community that enable families to continue to provide that care in childhood, but critically also that enable autistic people to live independent lives in adulthood as well. That's clearly not there, and there's clearly not a plan, and that's what we have to address. And that's why events like tonight are so important in terms of what we're trying to achieve.
Thanks, Adam. I have one more question for the panel, but before I put that question to the panel, I just want to remind people again that what was referenced at the outset of the webinar tonight, and that was from our CEO, Adam Harris, was to get behind AsIAm on this campaign, to write to your local TD to ensure that the recommendations and the report don't gather dust, that it is a priority for each of your representatives to engage with you on the recommendations, because at the end of the day, the reality is that it is we ourselves and you yourselves who are impacted by this, and we need to ensure that this is on a top priority for government and a top priority for our local representatives, and for it not to be forgotten about. So I just wanted to remind people that before we finish up on one last question. And I suppose it's only right to finish up on a question of positivity. There is a number of questions in the Q&A box, and we will get back to those, or people want to email AsIAm, they can. My colleague Adrian has put in the appropriate email as such. So I guess my one final question for the committee before we finish up on this Thursday evening is the hopes for the report. Micheal, I might come to you on that first, if that's okay, as the chair.
I want to see a situation where the report is implemented in full. I think I said it earlier on. I would have, as far as I'm concerned, this report will not gather dust, which a lot of reports do within the Oireachtas. I feel we went strong with what our main recommendations were in the report with regard to the legislating for the strategy, the all-party monitoring group, and I suppose it's been a very positive start to say we've got that support from the Cancórla for that. We have a mechanism to work with other Oireachtas committees across the various areas: health, education, social protection, housing. We have a mechanism to keep the implementation of the report live within the structures of the Oireachtas. And to be honest, that has never happened before with any report. So there is a very, very strong willing support, in my view, within the Oireachtas. And with regard to my role, my priority is to make sure that we legislate and implement this report before this current Dáil falls. And as I said, that's something I'm committed to. We're in the process of, as I say, putting the all-party committee together. As I said, we're actually meeting the group within the Scottish Parliament in a couple of weeks' time. But we're going to build a bigger group of legislators, cross-party, cross-Dáil, cross-Shannon, along with the members of the outgoing committee. And I think you would have met a lot of them members, and we have a very, very strong core committee group within that committee that want to make change. And like as you said earlier on, give everyone that same chance. So that's the path we're going. I don't have hope. I intend making it happen.
Thanks, Micheal. Àine, I'll put the same question to you. What are your hopes for the report?
Thanks, Michael. I suppose really it's the key things of having sufficient funding to actually have the resources for it. And then that there's monitoring and accountability to oversee it all.
It's short and sweet.
Yeah.
Alistair, I'll come over to you if that's okay. What are your hopes for the report, given what you know can potentially happen with your own country?
I mean, without actually going outside of my remit, I do definitely wish you all the best with the implementation of the report. I know that there's many stakeholders who have a finger in the pie. At the end of the day, I am aware how it is when you have to deal with different silos, because it is an issue in Malta, and I'm aware that in Ireland it is also an issue. But at the end of the day, this is the importance of civil society, the importance of professionals and academia, and especially the importance of autistic people. So there's always like strength in coming together. And one thing which I've actually seen, because like in our work, we have to work very closely with politicians also, when there's a lot of pressure for certain social groups, like things gain more traction. I know that it sounds obvious, but then again, unfortunately, because of this, sometimes the wrong things gain traction, even when you have, for example, proposals coached in the medical model, but when you have proper proposals, we've actually seen this in other areas also in Malta. For example, when it came to equal marriage, when it came to the LGBTQ community, one group actually got their act together very well, and we've actually seen immense social change. So with the disability community in Malta, if it had to band together in the same way, the autistic community would see the change happen much faster, so which I was pushing for. In Ireland, there's this opportunity also. We've got a very strong national coalition in the form of AsIAm. So I mean, pushing like forward, I'm not saying that miracles would happen, because then again, you're still up against the system. It's a great report, like I think it's like very clearly enunciated. But at the end of the day, it's all about, let's say, making sure that the decision makers, let's say, our products to actually deliver on that. Other than that, yes, I do wish all the best, and please do count on us if it can be of any support.
Thanks for that, Alistair. I think you're right. I think the idea is to bring those human stories to the fore of this conversation and indeed this campaign. And that's what I know we in AsIAm tend to do. I'll hand over the final words to our CEO, Adam, to see out the evening. So, but for me, thank you all for joining, and thank you for your participation and your engagement. And thanks to our panelists also as well. Adam, over to you.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you for a lovely job at chairing this evening. I think, for me, if there was one thing, or what does the world look like because of the success of the implementation of this report and the legislation to support it, I think it would be for autistic people and families to spend a little less time fighting and a little bit more time living. I think the bulk of the time when we hear from families, we hear about fight, we hear about people being told they're in the wrong place, we hear about people being told, we can't do that, you have to wait for this, I'm not the right person to talk to. And this really absorbs whole individuals' lives, and it really, I suppose, erects barriers to those day-to-day experiences in terms of education, work, making friends, life in the community that most people don't even have to think about. And we want to change this, and we all really believe in the report that Micheal and his committee have published can help bring about that change. But we need you to join the coalition to help us achieve that. We know there's so many competing pressures in politics and in life, and what we have a job to do is to make sure that autism remains at the top of the agenda. So what we're asking you to do, having come here this evening, is I've put the link in the chat. I'll do it again right now before the end of the webinar. We're asking you to take the time this evening to go to our website, to see the template letter we have, to write to your local representative, to ask your friends and family to do the same, so that when the Oireachtas report is tabled in the Oireachtas for debate, that we have many public representatives telling the government loud and clear, we need to legislate for this, and we don't need to legislate for it in a year's time or in the next all. We need to legislate for it right now or within the next 12 months. So we thank you for coming, and please join us, please help us spread the word, and let's make sure that autistic people have the same chance in Irish society. So thank you all so much, and a huge thank you to Micheal, to Àine, and to Alistair for making this evening so informative, and we hope everybody's learned something from it. So thank you very much.